her son. Here's the young man in the uniform of the...
There's always something to learn about knitting, sewing, or crochet. Stitch by Stitch is a new weekly magazine series that teaches you about all three. Step-by-step pictures show you all the
I've got a
basic
yellow
skills,
stripe
how to
down
pick
my...
the right yarns and fabrics, how to correct errors. Each week, learn how to make really fashionable clothes, like this pretty skirt in part 1. You can save money. It's easy, step by step, stitch by stitch. Mud Super Cleanser and new Mud Super Moisturizer introduce Super Skin. Once a week, go beyond routine cleaning and super clean your face right down to the pores with Mud Super Cleansing Beauty Treatment. And then go beyond routine moisturizing with new Mud Super Moisturizing Beauty Treatment. Apply it liberally and let it drench your super clean skin with moisture. First super clean, then super moisturize, then super skin.
Absolutely nothing, not shortening, no other lard. Nothing makes a lighter, flakier, more delicious pie crust. Nothing.
Webster is next on BCTV.
Good morning, 2 minutes early, a little bonus for you. The people who live in the Lower Mainland are now facing potentially and perhaps very probably the New York syndrome. Garbage piling up in the back alleys. Municipal offices effectively out of service all over the place. Won't have to worry about your building permit, won't have to worry about your inspections, won't have to worry about anything. Your municipality might save a little bit of money if you can put up with the inconvenience. I'm talking, of course, about the possibility, although the strikes and study sessions have already started in some areas, of a close down, effective close down of all the operations certified for CUPE, Canadian Union of Public Employees, and allied unions in the Greater Vancouver Regional District. Now, I was going to have Mike Kramer of CUPE here with Alderman John Parks, the chairman of the Labour Relations Committee of the Greater Vancouver Regional District. But Kramer couldn't make it this morning because they have a big vote on tonight in Vancouver. However, we'll see what we can drag out in the way of facts, figures, information, and fancy from John Parks. Also on the program this morning, as a man who has taken the odd snipe at Greenpeace, it may just be my liver or my kidneys or something, we're going to face up to how effective the Greenpeace people were if their credibility has been affected in any way by recent events, including their dramatic, confrontation of that massive 188,000-ton, deadweight-ton tanker, the BT San Diego, in the Straits of Juan de Fuca, when certainly Greenpeace achieved its object of having a number of people arrested. Patrick Moore, the head man in Greenpeace, is here this morning to answer perhaps what may be querulous questions from that old reactionary Webster. But first, GVRD and what they say is a very substantial, healthy, wealthy and final offer to Kramer and his boys and women and persons and the municipalities in the Lower Mainland after the break. To Alderman John Parks from Coquitlam, the district of Coquitlam, who is chairman of the Labour Relations Board of the Greater Vancouver Regional District. What a mouthful. Tell me, are you really unhappy that Mike Kramer of CUPE isn't here this morning? Are you prepared at any time to have an up and a downer with him?
Yes, I certainly am, Jack, and I am very disappointed because our difficulty to this juncture, at least, has been that initially CUPE refused to sit down and negotiate with us all the way since mid-November, and since things have been getting rather interesting, since we have been requested and in fact gave our final offer, unfortunately we have found that, in our opinion, there has been a number of misrepresentations and very confusing, if not clearly erroneous facts as to what our offer contains.
You're accusing Kramer of that, or the union generally?
I think that insofar as Mr. Kramer is leaders of one of the contingents, I have to clearly accuse, if you will put that word to me, accuse Mr. Kramer of either not understanding the package or misinforming his rank and file. He is not the only negotiator on that committee. In fact, that's part of the problem. There have been at least 2 or 3 chief negotiators, and we are getting different stories from different persons, and it's leading to a confusing state.
Not to be alarmist, but what is the total potentiality of this strike if, as many suspect, the CUPE and its allies picket and go out tomorrow or even Thursday?
It's very simple. All municipal services in the Lower Mainland will be shut down.
All of them?
All of them.
Except police and fire?
Well, I would expect that the police services and the fire services will maintain service. There is some concern that in those facilities where there are CUPE civilian workers, they may well attempt to picket fire stations and police stations, but already the GVRD has brought on an application asking for a hearing before the Labor Relations Board in order that we may ensure that our emergency services are continued.
When you say emergency services by police and fire, you mean just that, emergency services?
That is correct.
But picketing by the allied unions could hamper the normal services of police and fire?
If the picketing were to be permitted, certainly it would hamper them.
When do you get that decision?
Well, we had a statement from Mr. Kramer yesterday that, in fact, warning the fire department that they could expect pickets either tomorrow or Thursday. And we presented that information through our lawyers to the Labor Relations Board yesterday. So we don't have an answer at this moment, but we expect one imminently.
Now, forget the offer for the moment. You say your offer is a very generous offer.
It's extremely fair and generous, certainly within the experience of municipal workers. It's very generous.
All right. Now, I've been through this kind of negotiation before. When will you back down and reopen negotiations, and this will become not your final offer, but your second last offer?
Jack, I've just got to know you, and yet you're trying a union tactic. The CUPE refused to negotiate. They had the opportunity of working with us to develop the collective bargaining package. They opted out of that process. They gave us 2 alternatives. One was to back away from the table with about a 12% offer on it, or 2, we had to really work through what we'd have to conclude to be our final offer if they were sitting down opposite to us. We took the latter, of course, and we worked out a collective bargaining offer that we feel is extremely fair and as much as we can afford. That proposal, that offer was put to CUPE on January 16th. That was ratified by the respective councils in the Lower Mainland the following Monday, I guess to be the 19th.
So it is a final offer?
It was ratified on the basis that it would be our final offer. It was difficult for many of the members of my committee to go back to their councils and say, look, we're offering 15%, in some cases 23% increase. There's a range between 12.97 and 23%. The average, the weighted average is 15. A lot of aldermen said to me, what are you doing recommending such a high offer? And the basis was simply we took the inflation rate and the settlement rates and we added a catch-on rate, a catch-on factor.
Very generous with the taxpayers' money.
We had to balance the accusation that we're being overgenerous with reason. And we put together a final package. We have presented it as a final package, and it in fact is our final package.
So it ranges between 12.97% to 23% with a weighted average of 15%.
That is correct.
That includes health and welfare package and benefits.
It does, but that is an extremely complex issue too, and one that I wish I had the opportunity to explain to Mr. Kramer so that he could accurately inform his membership about that.
This affects, let me get it right for the viewers in this part of the world, North Vancouver City and District, West Vancouver, Vancouver, Richmond, Burnaby, New Westminster, Delta, Coquitlam, have I missed one?
Port Coquitlam, Port Moody.
Coquitlam and Port Moody and Port Coquitlam. right now. What stoppages are in effect now? One of my crew's garbage wasn't picked up and done by yesterday, and is quite hostile about it.
Well, we haven't become hostile, but we're concerned. We have a legal strike in Port Coquitlam.
Legal in Port Coquitlam,
I haven't had an update this morning, but yesterday afternoon the Port Moody employees went out. Since the GVRD offices nor myself have received notification from the Minister of Labour that the Albertini mediation report has been accepted, we can only construe that to be an illegal walkout. And we have had some job study action in Vancouver the last few mornings.
Bits and pieces.
Bits and pieces, yes.
Now, a number of your components have served lockout notices, which the union, I'm sure, feels is very provocative.
Well, somehow there at times appears to be a double standard. It is not, nor was it meant to be provocative. Pursuant to their request, we served a final offer. Our response to that was lockout notices. You must keep in mind that with the exception of Vancouver and Delta, each local obtained a strike mandate, a strike vote from their locals, way before we presented our final offer.
It was a blank check, kind
of. A blank check. The final offer...
That's not unusual. You can't knock the union for that.
It's not unusual, Jack, but I get somewhat disappointed when I see our response to a final offer, the service of strike notice. The offer's not put to anyone. We don't get a straight reply from the union. All we get is a strike notice served on us. In that situation, a number of us felt it would be the appropriate action to put ourselves on equal footing. In other words, we countered with a lockout notice.
Tit for tat. 72-hour strike notice and lockout notices, they have not been given all round. So far, just Coquitlam, Burnaby, Port Moody and North Van City.
That is correct.
The other lockout notices will come in due course.
If necessary.
So the key to the entire strike now is tonight's meeting of the Vancouver Municipal Regional Employees Union at Vancouver City Hall. Is that correct?
I would suggest that will certainly be a benchmark in these negotiations or this development.
Would it, hypothetical but practical, it would be a long strike?
I can't accept that it would be a long strike. You see, I'm working on the basis, and from the feedback I'm getting from rank and file, many of the employees think it's an excellent contract.
Oh, don't tell me your phone's ringing off the hook at home with people saying, "Hey, John, wish we could accept this, but the union's twisting our nose."
Well, the phone's being rung off the hook, but it's by the media. But every once in a while, a rank and file employee gets through, and I would suggest it's running about 3 to 1 in favor. I get the call saying, "Come on now, be fair to us." But I'm also getting the vast majority of the calls at home in my office saying it's a good contract.
Alderman John Parks, Chairman of the Labour Relations Committee of the GVRD. Just what is the offer? Is it really up to 23% in places? Well, is it $1.30 against the $3 demand? Let's find out after the break. Alderman John Parks, speaking for the GVRD, is going to spell out for us what he says is a very generous offer, which obviously, did the union members know about it, they'd accept. Is that what you're trying to tell me?
That is my contention. Certainly it's the GVRD position.
Right. Tell me.
Well, it's a many-faceted agreement, but in essence there are two main points. First of all is the general pay increase. And taking a weighted average, it's a 15% increase. Now, in fact, it is higher than 15% for those employees at the lower pay grades.
Well, that was one of his complaints, was it not? One of Kramer's complaints, and somebody's complaint in the paper, that the percentage increase gave the big ones a big raise and the ones at the bottom of the scale a much smaller raise.
Jack, that was one of the reasons I hoped Mr. Kramer was here today, because the assertion that's been put to me, and he has been quoted as the source of that, is that in fact the increases range from 8 to 18%.
Right.
And favor the highly paid employees versus the low. In fact, that's utter nonsense. I have brought the package, and I should note for the viewers that we're not talking about a 1 or 2 page agreement. We're talking about an 18-page agreement with 2 appendices. It's an extensive document. And the biggest problem we are having that CUPE did not sit down and talk to us is that we did not have the opportunity to explain to their negotiators what all this meant.
I mean, this is not really a negotiated package. Not really.
It couldn't be. They wouldn't talk to us. They refused to sit down and talk to us about this.
They were bound and determined to have a confrontation.
They were bound and in fact have had a confrontation.
Did Albertina, the mediator, manage to get the parties together, the three of you sitting around the table?
No, he attempted valiantly. We kept giving Mr. Albertini information and pointing out to him that our desire to have an opportunity to explain to the CUPE officials what this was.
Is it possible to give me samples of various pay levels to show how much they go up and how much they get paid?
I sure can, Jack. In fact, let's take pay grade 5, which, although it starts at 3, in fact, the lowest pay grade for most municipalities is 5. Under the current contract...
That's a clerk or something?
Yes, a clerk typist, they'd call that. At the present time, that clerk typist would be earning $863 per month. Under the proposed plan, if there hadn't been any adjustment, there would have been a $69 per month increase, raising it to $932.
Right.
Because the effect of that was only 8%, that wasn't acceptable under our agreement. So we said what we're going to do is we're going to ensure that no one will have less than 12.97. So if in this case you only have 8, then you move to the next increment. So instead of 932, it would be 974.
From 863 to 974 for how many hours a week?
35 or 37.5, depends on the job.
Inside or outside?
Inside or outside. Now that only works out to 12.86.
Right.
Doesn't quite make our minimum standard. So they go one more step. It now works out to $1,018.
Instant increase?
Instant, well, if they accept our contract, which they claim isn't fair.
1 year contract?
1 year contract.
You're telling me a PG5 clerk typist to that, or a clerk or an operator go from 863 to 1018?
That is correct, for a 17.96% increase.
At the low level of the scale?
The low level of the scale.
863 to 1018?
That is correct.
Not bad.
That's our position too, Jack. There are the same type of examples can be worked through.
Is it possible to take one at the higher end of the scale and show me how you haven't given them quite so much?
Well, okay, let's go to pay grade 33. And if you're at the highest grade of pay grade 33, and that's obviously our senior employees,
right?
Today they'd be making $2,957 per month. It would go up to $3,341 per month, a $384 increase, which is a 13% increase.
More money, but smaller percentage.
That is correct.
You've tried to balance it between the low paid and the high paid.
Exactly.
Now, what about this very generous health and welfare and other benefits you've improved in the current offer to them?
Well, that's...
I mean, what have you refused them, really? Take the money out. Have you refused them, apart from their demand? What is their demand?
Well, it depends how you calculate it. It can be calculated anywhere between 60% and 90% in 1 year. Well, they're asking for over $3 an hour across the board.
Right.
That's a 35% increase.
Right.
They're also asking for a $2 tradesman premium.
Right.
That affects about 25% of our employees. So you weight it through, it's about a 5% across the board increase.
Right.
And then they're asking for total parity between inside workers and outside workers. And it's very difficult to work that through, but we are calculating about 20%.
So that's 60%.
That's being what we call the lowest and most conservative calculation.
And to that you say the back of our hands.
Well, quite frankly, then I have to put on my aldermanic hat and say the taxpayers cannot afford that. It's just not reasonable. The marketplace doesn't dictate that either.
Health and welfare package. What improvements have you given them in the health and welfare package which should make them rush up and vote yes, 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 no, no, strike?
Jack, they can't do that when Mr. Kramer in the media is quoted as saying the employer is attempting to shift the huge cost of health benefits onto the employees. Again, utter nonsense, total nonsense, distortion of the worst kind. The whole restructuring of the package is predicated upon the basis that if an employee gets a benefit, in other words, if he's ill and his employer pays him, and the employer has previously paid the insurance cost, the premium cost,
right,
that benefit will be taxable in the hands of the employee. So he'll get his full salary, but he has to pay tax to the government. That tax works out to in excess of $1 million per year in the Lower Mainland. we have said, look, let's restructure this. And we're following the example in Burnaby. Burnaby has operated on this basis for quite some time now, most effectively. You take that $1 million and you plow it into better benefits. So what we're suggesting is
This is on a federal tax ruling.
that's correct. We're taking advantage of our federal tax laws for the benefit of our employees. At the present time, our employees pay an average of 1.7% of their gross pay into health benefits. Under this restructured plan, it would decrease to 1.6.
What kind of benefits do they get?
Just at this one point, if I may, Jack.
Yeah.
If our projections are in error, and in fact, the employees as a group have to pay more than 1.7%, the employer has guaranteed that in that eventuality, we will add more to the general pay increase. The employees cannot pay more for their health benefits. Now, instead of just being able to bank sick leave on the basis of 1.5 days per month, and of course, if a person becomes ill, then he draws on that bank, and if he's ill for an extended length of time, he could wipe out that bank. Instead of that type of a program, it's being changed so that for the first 2 working weeks, the first 10 days, the union administers a plan and pays out to the employee the full take-home benefits.
From its money?
From its money. I'll come back to that. But from week 3 through week 69, the employer will pay the employee 80% of his salary.
Is that tax-free?
No, it's not tax-free. But that's 1 1/3 years
For sick benefit?
for sick benefits.
After the union picks up the first 10 days?
Yes.
Was this a shock for them to be told to pick up the first 10 days?
We have never had anyone through Mr. Albertini come back to us and say, that's not acceptable. And as much as the Burnaby experience is very positive, I do not believe it's a shock. I believe the statements from the CUPE leaders are purely meant to be provocative, red herrings, and trying to distort the issue.
John Parks, Alderman, speaking for the Greater Vancouver Regional District as we are on the verge of this GVRD-wide work stoppage, one way or another, after the break. I'm really quite sorry Mike Kramer of CUPE couldn't make it this morning. I'm not blaming him. You can't expect him to run and jump whenever I want to have a confrontation on the air. But your basic case, Alderman John Parks, is that, one, CUPE have refused to negotiate in good faith?
Clearly. In fact, Jack, if I may, we have filed unfair labor practice against CUPE.
Unusual for an
Very
employer
unusual.
to do that?
Jack, we still wanted, before all this job action commenced, we still wanted the opportunity to explain our final offer to the leaders so they could accurately inform their membership of it. We haven't had that chance, so we've gone to the Labor Board asking them to direct the union to listen to us.
I can't remember that being done before.
Nor can I.
That's a new kind of application. How many employees involved altogether?
Approximately 6,000 with a $100 million job or salary package.
And you say that Kramer is not, or whoever speaks for the union is not giving the full facts when they're not representing properly your offer, which is a weighted offer of 15%, ranging from just under 13% to as high as 23%.
That is correct.
But you haven't given them the parity between the inside and outside workers. They wanted that, didn't they?
That's a demand they have put forth, but realistically we can't. You know, we have, I think, a unique situation in municipal services in that we have a very broad range of employees. Some of those employees have the benefit of being inside workers, and they work in rather warm, comfortable, well air-conditioned buildings. But others have to go out on the streets in good old Vancouver inclement weather and get wet to the bone 2 out of every 3 days. They have to work in the mud and all the other difficulties of outside workers. There has never been a barrier to prevent what are typically classified inside workers, i.e. Clerk, stenos. The accusation that the GVRD is somehow sexually discriminating. We have female employees in the outside workers. There is no barrier. Women are welcome to apply. In fact, some do work in our outside staff. There is a difference between our pay rates for those who work inside and those who work outside.
But not on the basis of sex, you tell me.
Oh, nothing to do with sex, but the marketplace, Jack.
How many of them are in 4-day weeks on the 35 hours, just as a matter of interest?
Relatively few. Vancouver, I believe, is the only one who is still experimenting with that.
Yeah, none of the others have gone for that yet.
Not to my knowledge.
okay, and you say that the union's demands, which you have not really, you've explored in some broad generality, is for an increase of something like cost to the municipal taxpayer of 60% on the present cost of employing these people.
I'm afraid so, Jack.
That's kind of brutal, isn't it?
Well, it's also very unrealistic. We simply cannot afford it.
Now, Albertini is a provincial mediator, and he's expected to report out at any moment. Is that correct?
My understanding is that Mr. Albertini, in fact, booked out at the request of CUPE last Thursday, and that he filed a report last Friday. And all we are waiting for is the Labour Minister, Mr. Heinrich, to advise us that he has received and, in fact, accepts that report. And the moment CUPE and the GVRD receive that notification, both parties are in a position to take legal job action.
Now, the rest of the contract, have you ever compared your contract, your benefits contracts, with other unions or with other municipal unions elsewhere? I asked you to spell some out, and you said, oh, that's routine, everybody gets that. What is it that everybody gets?
Well, in fact, I have recently looked at some of our benefits compared to the Teamsters, and it seems that, again, our benefits are much more significant than even the Teamsters, which surprised me. Things like the $50,000 life insurance paid for by the employer, fully paid by the employer.
Full dental services, I presume?
Dental, extended health, disability.
Sick leave, you've explained to me.
There's a couple of real quirks in our contracts, the CUPE contracts. One is that the CUPE negotiators are paid to negotiate against us. We pay to have them drag out this process, refuse to talk to us, and somehow it's an
Listen, they
interesting
used to
system.
do that at Simon Fraser, but I think they finally stopped it. Give me that again, just as a matter of querulous interest. You're telling me that
At this time,
any member of the union who's involved in negotiations with your people, you pay their wages. But you tell me they're not negotiating.
well, in fact, it's only two per local. Okay, and most municipalities have two locals, inside and outside. So basically, like in Coquitlam's situation, we are paying for 4 employees to take part in their negotiating process. Now, that may be the 2 or 4 of them caucusing with their other advisors and whatever. And yes,
Well, you mean not sitting down with the committee?
not necessarily.
Within their office time, they carry on the union business, and the taxpayers in Coquitlam or whatever pay their full normal salaries.
That is the way it has been to date. We have suggested that has to change, and we're prepared to compromise, and as opposed to take that away totally, what we are suggesting we are prepared to do is give the union $1 per union employee per month. And then they can administer that fund as they wish for their negotiating
For the negotiations.
But
6,000 employers, that would be 6,000, that would be $72,000 a year you'd give them to buttress the negotiation.
Exactly. But we're not just going to give them a carte blanche to carry on negotiations. And of course, the other interesting factor is that all these contracts to date have been retroactive. So there's no true impetus for the union negotiators to get this thing settled. It's all going to be retroactive back to January 1st.
Of this year?
Of this year.
1-year contract only?
1-year contract.
Have they indicated whether they want more than a 1-year contract?
Well, we're the ones who definitely wish to have more than a 1-year contract. We'd like to have these things stable for some period of time. It's the union who have said they're not prepared to give us more than a 1-year contract. In fact, this final offer, being a 1-year contract, is a very significant concession on our part. This can be reopened September 1st. Negotiations commence again. If we aren't accurate in our assertions that 11% is very fair, and the 1980 CPI is only 10.2%, so I think we have accurately reflected inflation. We're also throwing in at least a 4% catch-up clause to bring them closer to the community average. If we haven't in fact shown that good faith, then come September they can come back to us and say, you know, you fellas are full of it. You didn't do a good job for us. You weren't
Well, you're
fair to
actually
us.
giving them on your weighted average there for us an 11% inflation catch-up, 11% increase to match inflation, you think, plus a 4% catch-up.
That is correct. That's the generalities.
I don't know how much the public want to get involved in this one way or another on the phones this morning, but I'd like to try it. It's a pity Mike couldn't make it this morning. He had union business. I'm not nagging him about the fact that he wasn't here. Nice to have them both together, though.
Anytime, Jack.
Webster and John Parks, spending your money and also trying to negotiate with CUPE.
We have been trying for 4
Why
months.
don't you sit down with them today? before you come to a strike?
Well, that's, if CUPE is prepared to discuss anything, they are more than welcome to contact Mr. Albertini.
Oh, will you sit down with Albertini too?
Well, first of all, you mean the GVRD. It's not my function to sit down and negotiate.
Leslie and the boys.
It's Mr. Leslie's department, correct. He's our negotiator.
You're the political spokesman.
I'm the political spokesman, yes.
Your calls, short, sharp, and to the point after the break. John Parks and your calls. You know, I don't know. Go ahead, please. Where are you? That's nobody there. Are you there? No, that's gone. Hello.
Hello, is that
That's you,
Jack
sir.
Webster?
Speak up. My mistake. Go on, speak up, sir. Is that not working this morning? Go ahead, please. No, they're not there. They're there, but they're not coming through. Are you there? Can you hear me? Okay, now, just 1 second. Do speak up, please.
Yes, I was wondering if you could ask Mr. Park if what he considers negotiating, because from what I understand, the GVRD has not negotiated, not offered to sit down and negotiate. They've offered to explain their offer. But to me, that's not negotiating. The union has offered to come down on some of their demands, and to me, that's more of a negotiating type of situation.
That's a very fair question, Jack, and I'm afraid it's the perception that the union leadership has very effectively planted in their members' minds. The idea of collective bargaining is that the employees and the employer sit down face to face and in good faith negotiate out a contract. This process was commenced in the fall. The GVRD negotiators put forth an offer, CUPE put forth an offer, and they did some negotiating. They didn't get very far, as never they do in the first round or so. Rather than continuing with good faith negotiations, CUPE refused to withdraw any of their offers and in effect stonewalled the rest of the process. We put in a second proposal. We didn't get any straight answers. Still the stonewalling, still no substantive changes in the
This is face to face.
This is, well, it didn't last very long face to face. By this time, the mediators called in. There is a time for the face-to-face confrontation, the negotiations, and we welcomed it. It did not happen. CUPE elected to opt out of the collective bargaining process. They then taunted us, solicited from us a final offer. We gave them that final offer on January 16th. As of that moment, the time for quote-unquote collective bargaining is over. CUPE didn't, they had their chance and they decided not to. It's not fair, it's not realistic to say, give me your bottom line, employer, and once I've got it, I'm going to negotiate up. We're just not going to do that.
There used to be a time when CUPE and other unions objected strongly to being faced with professional negotiators, such as Mr. Leslie and company. They don't object to that now, do they?
How can they? Again, at times I can accuse them of employing a double standard, but all the negotiators for CUPE are full-time paid CUPE negotiators. Each local has representatives, but Mr. Kramer, Mr. Cott, and others are paid professional negotiators.
Does that make you any happier, ma'am?
Well, it answers a couple of my questions.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. Before, speaking of paid negotiators, it was the GVRD that banded together the municipalities, or the municipalities banded together to form the GVRD, and they're the ones that started this professional negotiation.
Well, that's common
It used to be
sense.
done on a local level. Secondly, with ICBC rates being what they are, I just received my insurance yesterday, it's scandalous, and house taxes going anywhere from 20 to 30%. How can your gentlemen sit there so smugly and pretend that they're giving the CUPE workers a great deal? I don't work for CUPE myself. I work for the fire department, but the way the cost of living has been going, it's the GVRD that's not being realistic. I think there should be rudely awakened. And I'd like to ask the gentleman what he intends to do with the gratuity days that workers have collected up until now. Are they going to pay them out, or are they just going to let them go by the wayside to be taken as sick days?
Okay, two questions. First of all, if I'm appearing smug, I certainly apologize for that, because I don't think it's something that anyone should be smug about. The cost of living index, the consumer price index for 1980 is 10.2%. That is a statistic, that is a fact.
That's a bunch of baloney, and you know it.
I am sorry, sir. It is not a bunch of baloney.
You know, why is my insurance up about 35 to 40%? Why are my house taxes projected to be 30% more? Why is, with the LRAT coming in, they're going to slap another $60 on my house taxes? I mean, who do you think you are that you can sit there and say this kind of nonsense?
Wait till we get the tax
Maybe
subsidies.
groceries and things like this might be still within reason. But when it comes to big items, it's getting pretty bad.
Now, you see, this chap here has got a reasonable point of view. He wants you, as a municipal taxpayer's representative, to pick up his total cost of living, including his ICBC increase, his subsidies in Japanese coal, and everything else. Now, why don't you give them a 100% increase?
You know, it's not my purse strings. We are only elected by the people, hopefully, to do a responsible job. You know, his position, I think, is not realistic.
Do these employees have security?
Do they have security? I mean, we have the
Do they have year-round jobs?
They do.
Can you compare them with the IWA, on again, off again, up again, down again, snow again, ice again, fire season again?
No, I don't think it's fair. But may I? I'm sorry. This gentleman did point out the question of gratuities.
What's a gratuity?
If you have worked for the municipality for a number of years, you will have banked sick leave.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? Now we're changing the program.
Oh.
If you'll remember, I said from week 3 through week 69, the employee would be indemnified 80% of his salary.
Total salary.
Okay, if he happened to have banked time, then he would be getting 100%.
Oh, he's got 1.5 days per month banked sick leave for every day every month he's not off sick.
That is correct.
So if he works for a year, he's got 12 on 12, he's got 18 days banked time.
This program would go in September 1st. So if the man
is that why when fire chiefs and things resign, suddenly they've got 2 years extra pay?
Yes, that is going to be changed.
Oh, yes.
That will be changed.
You're going to stop that?
We're going to stop that. But as a transitionary factor, we're not going to take away their bank time. They're going to have that credit. So as opposed to merely being paid 80% of their salary if they're ill for a year and a half,
you're going to give them 100%.
We're going to give them 100%. So
but when they retire after an arduous life at 60 and a 35-hour week, they're not going to get the bank time in future.
No, they're not.
Uh-oh. Do they know this?
Well, if I believe they know that.
They count that as an extra year's retirement money.
Well, no.
I mean, I know CBC employees who are still on bank time.
With all due fairness, it's realistic, our proposal.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, as a taxpayer, I would just like to ask Mr. Parks to explain Mayor Mercier's statement last night in the paper that said, that's not collective bargaining, it's collective bludgeoning.
I'm sorry, that is not Mr. Mercier's statement. That is a direct quote.
Right here, it's Mr.
That's what it said in the paper.
That's Mr. Mercer, as opposed to Mayor Mercier. Mr. Mercer is the regional director. And what he is suggesting, again, I would have to accuse him of employing a double standard. They're trying to say because we, at their request, gave them a final offer and are now refusing to negotiate up from that, and because we have all voted to maintain a steadfast position on that, we're collective bludgeoning. Well, I think that is not the least bit accurate.
Well, anyway, just relax, taxpayer. You're going to pay it. Okay? Bye. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Hello.
Yes, yes.
I used to work for the municipality,
Yes, speak up.
City of Vancouver and the municipality of Burnaby. And when I worked for them, I made very close to the IWA rates, plus some because I was a tradesman.
Right, right.
And now the tradesman's rate for the same trade is $4 an hour less than mine. And I no longer, needless to say, I no longer work for the municipalities. It's my understanding the municipality of Burnaby can no longer keep decent mechanics in their shop. They're being hired for private industry, left and right. And this kind of procedure on the part of the municipalities is irresponsible to the taxpayers. They're not able to keep...
Are you losing employees because of your apparently poor pay rates for tradesmen and skilled personnel, heavy mechanics and whatnot?
Not to my point, but the gentleman again has raised a very good point. In the 60s, in the early 60s, the IWA pay rate was less than Vancouver's. At that point, combined with their fringe benefits, Vancouver was probably the best paying employer in the province of British Columbia. What is the position the municipal employer should take? Should it be the highest paying employer? Should it be the lowest paying employer? I think not to both questions. I think he should be the most reasonable, the average. He should set the average trend, and that's what we're doing now. We are taking market rates. If we weren't reasonable, we wouldn't have employees.
My thanks to Alderman John Parks for the first installment of what hopefully will be a short-lived confrontation between CUPE and the GVRD and their 6,000 employees. Key meeting is tonight, of course, the Vancouver Municipal Regional Employees Union, as I recall.
That is correct, and I hope
Mr. Kramer, unless it's miraculously settled today, Mr. Kramer will be on the programme hopefully Thursday morning. If I need you, can I shout you?
You surely may.
My thanks to John Parks. Next, what's his name again? Greenpeace, Patrick Moore. Tell you a little inside story. I came into the office yesterday morning in an acerbic mood. And I was saying to myself, that Greenpeace, really? What the devil are they up to? The thing was full of seawater. It wasn't doing any harm. Out they go. Patrick Moore, of all people, symbolically pushes back the 188,000-ton tanker, the BT San Diego. I said, I'm going to do a nasty piece on it. And my crew, much younger than myself, in unison rose and said, don't do it. Jackie, baby, you're wrong. Moore is right. It's up to you to improve your credibility with me this morning, because I seem, Patrick Moore, to have been gathering little bits of irritability about you. And I'm going to show you, 15 seconds from now, a little bit of irritability by a fellow called Paul Watson. And then we're going to have an inquest, not an inquest, a properly decent research into the functions, the direction, and the goodness of Greenpeace. Here's Watson, your friend. Why don't you pool your resources, he asks?
I sure wish that we could. The seal hunt, like I said, is making about $3.6 million. The organizations that are opposed to the seal hunt bring in about $12 million. If they all got together, we could buy out the sealing industry. But unfortunately, they won't get together because too many of these organizations have a vested interest in the seal hunt, because if the seal hunt was ended, they'd all be out of a job.
Not quite to the point, but it's to provoke Patrick. That was the swashbuckler, Paul Watson, who used to be part of your organization. What do you take of his criticisms of Greenpeace? Why don't you buy out the seal hunt and get that one out the way?
Well, I think that tactic was tried, Jack, quite a few years ago by a number of different people. A man from Switzerland named Franz Weber, who had the backing of Brigitte Bardot and her people, did offer to buy out the seal hunt, and they were refused. It's a political issue. It's not an economic issue. It's not something you can just come in there with dollars and buy out. But you know, Paul's divisive sort of approach of criticizing other environmental groups is seen as counterproductive by the other groups, and it's just too bad that he takes that angle. He's not a team man, as you say. He's a bit of a swashbuckler, one-man show, and the rest of us are trying to work in a concerted effort with all the other environmental groups around the world.
Let's take it kind of one at a time. We'll come to the tanker test in a little while, but I remember being a little bit something or other when you started suing each other. When Greenpeace began to sue California, and California was suing somebody else, and we were racking up a lot of legal bills. Have you straightened out all that mess yet?
Completely, yes. The real problem there was a group of people who started off with 12 of us in the basement of the Unitarian Church in Vancouver, grew into an international organization with 30 offices in 12 different countries around the world, and the growing pains were tremendous, Jack. It was
too much money was coming in.
No, there wasn't too much money. There was too many people vying for too many positions, and too much growth, and too much increased involvement with media, with issues, that sort of thing. So there was a power struggle, basically. It wasn't over money. It was over influence within the organization.
All right, now, has the power struggle now been resolved? Who is in command? Greenpeace of Vancouver or Greenpeace of somewhere else?
Well, we resolved it with what was really a good compromise. The reason for the lawsuit was just to force the issue. It wasn't to try and get money from some other part of Greenpeace. But what we did was we resolved the issue by setting up an international board of directors, which is now headquartered in Washington, D.C. And that international board has representatives on it from 10 different countries, 6 of whom have a vote on that international board. And I'm the representative from Canada, and therefore have direct participation at the international level.
Do you keep your finances separate? What money you raise, is it kept separately, or is it all controlled out of Washington, D.C.?
There's a pooling, basically, of surplus funds. If we are able to raise more money here in Canada than we need for our basic overhead, which has to be approved each year by the International Board, then that money is available for the 6 of us to sit around and decide which international campaigns will receive it.
Not to knock all the consciousness raising you've done, but what is the cost of running Greenpeace in Canada?
The total overhead cost of Greenpeace in Canada is somewhere in the neighborhood of $85,000.
That's to run your headquarters in Vancouver and your administrative expenses?
Yes, and we have an office in Toronto, Montreal, and Victoria as well.
Are you highly paid as the president?
I personally am paid $1,200 per month gross pay, and that is the highest salary paid in Greenpeace in Canada.
Plus a little bit in expenses when you travel?
Whatever expenses are required, yes.
Well, $1,200 a month, 12,000, 12,224.
14,000 a year.
It's not an exorbitant salary.
No, we don't believe in exorbitant
Let me
salaries.
be the first to say. Okay, the next thing. You made your pitch about not wanting the killer whales in the pool at Stanley Park, and I thought, now that really is carrying it to excess. The public loves to see the whales seem to enjoy themselves in there. Why would you take that attack on such a fine established institution as Murray Newman and the aquarium?
Well, we weren't so much questioning the fine institution as this particular aspect of it, where we believe that whales are being exploited for the purpose of box office attraction to gain further receipts to the aquarium on the basis that, yes, people do like seeing these whales.
Love to see
But they don't see the dead whales, Jack. They don't see the whales that are killed in the nets during the capture process. They don't see the whales that die on the airplane. And when the whales finally are in the tank, which we think is cruel by modern zookeeping standards because it's not up to scratch for giving a natural environment and allowing a place for whales to breed, when those whales die in captivity, they haven't had an opportunity to breed and to help the survival of their own kind in the wild.
I still think you're pushing that a bit hard. The beluga whale with the baby was one of the great natural wonders of the world which would never have been seen without the aquarium, wasn't it?
That's not true, no. The Eskimo people up north see baby beluga whales every year.
We don't.
Well, we can go there and televise it back here if we want, Jack.
We were totally fascinated by it, and it made a lot of people consciousness of the delicacy of whales. If they hadn't seen them in the aquarium, they would have said, well, the Eskimos keep the belugas. You know what I mean?
Well, that's what they say anyways. I don't see how the aquarium has actually saved any whales. As a matter of fact, what they're doing is they are removing them from the wild. And if they can't breed in captivity, once they're removed from the wild, they might as well be dead.
I'm sure if the whales were in charge of the world, they'd have a couple of human beings in cages so they could study their reaction to the whales surrounding them.
Well, thank goodness they don't have the kind of power we do.
Okay, now let's get to the, just a minute, I'll go through my wee notes here. Aquarium I've talked about. Watson I've given to you. Lawsuits I've talked about. No. Now, salaries I've asked you about. Now, what about this test? If I were any more reactionary, I'd probably say to you, here's the U.S. Coast Guard. Fill a bleeding big tanker full of salt water, 188,000 deadweight tons. And they bring it through the pass, on notice, with tugs available, to demonstrate to themselves, apparently, and to confirm that no tankers bigger than 125,000 should, if they ever come, go into the oil port at, where is it, Port Angeles. Now, what was wrong with that test? Was that not a reasonable thing for them to do?
No, it wasn't. And we said from the beginning that these so-called tests were not experiments. They had nothing to do with science and everything to do with politics. And that was our basic position on it. Now, if they're able somehow to use the data that they have gained from chugging a tanker around full of seawater in the Straits of Juan de Fuca to increase the limits and to reduce the amount of oil and to reduce the number of tankers coming in through the Straits of Juan de Fuca, good for them. But the trusty U.S. Coast Guard is not being so trusty in this case as far as we're concerned. They are acting as front runners for the oil industry, and they are allowing this thin edge of the wedge to come in there because there's already a rule that says tankers over 125,000 tons can't come in there, and they go and bring one in breaking their own rules to do these tests, and then they make a new line around the tanker saying Greenpeace can't come in there, saying it was a safety zone. Well, for whose safety?
For your safety.
Well, they're trying to tell us that in calm water in the Straits of Juan de Fuca, with a supertanker going 6 knots, barely moving, that some of the most experienced Zodiac drivers in the world who've been out against the whole Russian whaling fleet 1,000 miles from land, going 18 knots, running around in high seas, are in trouble.
You knew perfectly well, however, when you went out in that test last Friday, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
That they were going to whip you up because you were challenging the power and might of the Coast Guard, the special regulations, and the U.S. authorities.
No way, Jack. They told us before we went in there that they'd do everything they could to make it easy for us to have a protest.
If you stayed away from the 2,000 foot...
No. They told us we could go inside. They phoned us up from Seattle and tried to defuse the situation. Because they made that 2,000 foot rule up after we said we were going out there. That rule was made for us. You know the seal protection regulations in eastern Canada that they made up after we went out there to protest the seal hunt? Well, this was a supertanker protection regulation. It was no safety zone.
It would seem common sense to me not to have a bunch of little rubber boats running around when they've got tugs and a bleeding big tanker wallowing through that strait.
Well, wallowing is the key word. We're way more maneuverable than they are. We're not going to get in any trouble, and we're not crazy. We're not going to run into the side and kill ourselves or something.
Well, I can think of some incidents in the past where somebody was shackled to shackled himself in the sailing fleet and was hauled aboard through the ice.
We actually didn't appreciate that tactic too much.
I forget who did that.
Paul Watson. That was just
before. Oh, is that the old swashbuckler?
Just before he left us, Jack, yeah.
Webster and Patrick Moore and the Greenpeace after the break. Is it not a fact that support for Greenpeace has dropped off for one reason and another?
Absolutely not. We got more support now than we've ever had, Jack, around the world. We're moving in now with offices in Belgium and Germany. Our Australian and New Zealand offices are bigger than they've ever been. And here in Canada, where Greenpeace was founded, I believe that we have basically reestablished our credibility. We went through a pretty tough few years with the internal struggles that we had and also with the seal hunt.
Oh, yeah, I remember when you backed off on the seal, chickened out and gave up. Was that you?
Not exactly, Jack, no.
You did. You said, oh, no, we're not going to interfere with your livelihood, and you backed out of that little town.
Oh, that was in the beginning, and it was construed that way. That was when Bob Hunter and Paul Watson sort of gave up the dye that they were going to dye the seals green with in front of the cameras.
Bob Hunter used to work for the Sun.
Yes, sir. He used to work for Greenpeace, too.
Still around?
He's still in town, yeah.
Hadn't heard of him lately. What was the other thing you did? Trying to drag up stuff down, are you? Okay. Is it not a fact that you... Get that smile off your face, Webster. This is not meant to be nice. How come you were the only one the Coast Guard allegedly hassled and brutalized? You must have been behaving like a bit of a nit when they came on board.
No, I wasn't, actually.
And you were arrested last week.
Yeah, I did refuse to voluntarily get out of my boat and get on their boat, which they said you better do, because they are U.S. officers. I was in my boat, they were on their boat, and so I made them come down and get in my boat to put hands on me. And once they put the hands on you, then you go peacefully, otherwise you're resisting arrest.
Is it not a fact that one of them put his hands on the plug of the outboard and got a very bad jolt?
Yeah, I think that's maybe one of the reasons they treated me a little rough, because the rubber thing on the stop button had fallen off my outboard motor and it was idling fairly fast, so he shoved his finger on the stop button and basically stopped the motor by shorting out the spark plugs with his finger. And that goes right up to about here somewhere. And
he turned on you?
Yeah, he sure did. Yeah, he gave me about half an hour pretty rough treatment there.
Not half an hour. What did he do, whip you down at the deck?
Yeah, he whipped me down on the deck, handcuffed my hands behind my back, and spent about 20 minutes to half an hour body searching me, going through every piece of my hair, looking for knives, taking my shoes and socks off, and feeling all around my whole body.
Oh, you're an infamous Waddle character.
And then they got all my fingerprints now, you know, down FBI headquarters and everything.
Well, you broke a federal law of some kind, and they're entitled to have your fingerprints to see if you have any other criminal record.
Actually, it's a misdemeanor, Jack, that we broke. And the immigration authorities in the United States were so nice to us that they paid us a personal visit in our cells while we were there in order to inform us that in case we were worried, even if we were convicted of these things, this would not have any effect on our immigration and our free passage into the United States in the future. So it's no big deal.
It is a misdemeanor?
That's right.
Was the paper wrong when it said are we wrong when we said $50,000 and 5 years in the bucket? The
reason they have these high maximum penalties is because these laws are meant for supertankers usually, not for little rubber boats. They're meant for huge shipping companies and multinationals who have to have a pretty big deterrent. Otherwise they could say, hey, well, we're going to save $5,000 an hour by breaking the law.
By whipping through the...
Yeah.
So that's one good thing they've done then, the U.S.
Well, yeah, except they made the safety zone for us instead of the supertankers.
Could have been drowned, you know.
Yeah, with the way the Coast Guard boats were behaving, the amazing irony of the thing was, Jack, is that we were out there in our little rubber boats in a great big supertanker going 3-5 knots through the water. And here comes these cowboys in their Coast Guard cutters, 80-foot-long steel boats, making these huge wakes, practically swamping us overboard, and then chasing us down like James Bond, right? Coming right up behind us with their bows cutting into us. So the Coast Guard turned their own safety zone into the most dangerous place in the Straits of Juan de Fuca.
Oh, you created it, let's face it.
Oh, we were just running around our boats.
You went down there to be arrested.
No, sir. We went down there to have a test blockade of a supertanker to prove to people in Washington and B.C. that it's not dangerous to go in there and stop one of these things. And it wasn't. The only thing dangerous...
Not on that occasion.
Just the Coast Guard was the only thing dangerous.
Yeah, but if you tried to do that or got in the way of a big tanker, even an 80,000-ton tanker, the kind which presently go in there, I believe, it would cause great problems.
We'd let them have plenty of warning we were there, Jack. If there were 500 little boats sitting in the way, and we let them know 10 miles in advance.
You're going to do that next?
Well, it's a good opportunity, isn't it, to try and make some kind of statement against these things.
You haven't done anything about the tankers that come through there now, have you?
Well, we just did. I mean, we pointed out what's going on down there.
The ones carrying oil.
People are going to find out about that now from yourself saying it, for example. But the fact of the matter is, you can't just walk out there any day of the week and have a protest. You got to organize it properly.
Matter of fact,
they gave it to us on a platter.
You only held up their test for about an hour, 2 hours.
Yeah, it was just a test for us. It wasn't, you know, our objective was not to stop these tests from taking place. Our objective was to bring awareness and concern about supertankers and oil traffic into our waters, and also to prove that we could stop a tanker for even 2 minutes would be good enough to prove that you could do it. Because if the Coast Guard...
obviously annoyed a few people. Remember that famous expression that I heard on our television coverage, sink the mothers?
Well, no, the Toronto Globe and Mail interpreted that as sink the mother, meaning the supertanker, so we don't know who they were saying.
No, that's not what it meant. Take my knowledge of colloquial language to interpret it quite clearly that it meant sink you.
No, it doesn't necessarily. If it was plural or if it was singular is what's important, not whether what it meant.
Singular or plural, it had the same meaning to me, I'll tell you, Patrick. Anyway, let's see how your image is. With me, perhaps you've improved it a little, although I'm getting to that edge of the scale where you think, when the Yanks want the gas, if war breaks out and nothing comes and it's smarter and quicker to bring it in there, we can't stop them short of nuclear war.
I got a most interesting eye-opening throughout this campaign, and that was that the media in the United States, in Washington State, Seattle, etc., was way more positive about our protest than the media here in British Columbia was. Okay. Some of the media here acts as if we're the 52nd state in this issue and we've got to help our brothers to the south get their oil to Chicago. But the people in Washington State...
who's even a little bit down on you at the moment. Everybody else seems to lick your boots as far as I'm concerned, but you're a big hero.
There was an editorial in the province over the weekend, that kind of thing. Yeah, but that kind of thing isn't...
The patter of tiny feet.
That's not happening in the United States, Jack. They're unanimously in favor of stopping supertankers down there, right up to the highest level in Washington State.
Sure program, Moore. How's your father?
He's just fine. Yeah, doing really well. He's working on the forestry center.
We'll leave the personal gossip to later.
Logging sports, things
Moore
like that.
of Greenpeace. Hold back the world. After the break. Your point is that it wasn't really a test of anything, bringing the San Diego through Juan de Fuca.
It really wasn't. If by test they meant experiment, and if they thought it had anything to do with science, they're way off base. Because firstly, they weren't repeating each thing they did enough times to get some kind of statistical sample that you could put in a computer. Secondly, there was no control against which to measure what they were doing. And thirdly, and most important of all, they weren't testing the really important variables. All they were testing was engine failure and rudder being hard over and failing. Those things have never caused a shipping accident in the Straits of Juan de Fuca. All the accidents are caused by thick fog, poor communications, bad weather,
poor navigation,
or combinations. So we say if they want to do a proper test, what they do is they take two ships, and unbeknownst to each other, they aim them at each other in thick fog. On one ship you have a crew that speaks English, on the other ship you have a crew that speaks no English, and you see if they hit each other or not.
You're a jam. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yes.
I'd just like to say that though I will agree that you are saying that Greenpeace...
You've got to turn down your radio. Dear, flashback. The 7-second delay which you experience on your television set gives you instant psychosis. You must turn down the sound before you talk on the telephone. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Mr. Moore, I was interested in your last comment before you went to a station break. I'm interested in what extent Greenpeace is now an international organization, and to what extent it is now a Vancouver or a Canadian conservation society. I mean, some of your large percentage of your original founders were American, And to what extent can they divorce their American, what's in the interest?
How independent is Vancouver Greenpeace? He already told us that they have a council of 10 nations, is it, in Washington, D.C.?
Yes.
That you contribute surplus funds not required for Canadian activities to the International Fund, and you've got new organizations throughout Europe and the world.
And we have, every country that's a member of this voting body has a veto on any international campaign, so we have to work it out amongst ourselves.
You sure dropped yourself in it when you picked up that vague Russian report, a report from Geneva, and said the Russians were going to stop whaling.
Yeah, it was too bad. It wasn't from Geneva, it was the Paris embassy of Russia, and they're the ones who said Russia was stopping whaling, and they're the closest capital in the West to Russia, so we believed it.
Certainly with you on that. Who knows, that particular international furor might jog the Russians' conscience on whaling.
Let's hope so.
Go ahead from Victoria to Patrick Moore of Greenpeace.
Thank you, Jack. I've got two brief questions, one for Mr. Moore and one for you. I want to just establish that we're really just taking Mr. Moore's word against the word of the U.S. Coast Guard. I understand the Coast Guard wanted to prove that these big tankers couldn't come in the Straits. And secondly, they not only want to prove that, they want to insist that the smaller tankers now coming through the Straits require 2 tugboats. Surely that would be a big improvement over what we have now, would it not?
Most certainly would, and let's hope that's the result. And I don't think our protests out there are going to make that any less probable. Maybe they'll make it easier for the Coast Guard to get through, because we showed that the public was behind us.
Well, we have your word against theirs. I think their motives are a lot better than you're outlining. And Mr. Webster, I want to ask you, this organization, I think you've questioned your credibility, and I think a lot of the members of the public have, and I think their failing support in recent years proves that. This organization opposes everything from whales to seals to sewage over here in Victoria.
Well, we're in favor of whales.
Bears. They've even apparently in Vancouver wanted flea collars out banned to protect the fleas. I really wonder how long the media is going to be manipulated to the extent, and I think you have to admit you are being manipulated.
I asked him to come on this morning because
you are being manipulated to the extent that one of your own news crews gets arrested with the darn people. So do you not feel the media has been somewhat used by a very clever organization that really stages essentially media events?
Yes.
They've done a great job on you, I think.
Haven't done a great job on me. I was one of those who first helped to start Greenpeace's financings way back in the Chitka days.
Right, I wish your news...
And I had a great falling out with them over a question of handling of the money, but that's a long time ago.
I wish your news crews were that shrewd. I mean, they even get arrested with them.
Our news crews were doing a proper job in the proper place, and I don't want to say any more about it because of the fact
I think I made my point, Jack, and I just...
Good point. Thanks very much. You certainly can plead... you can certainly claim that you have manipulated the media and made everything you do into a media event.
Well, I don't know.
We've got to be careful, you know. The television creates the event, as you all know. If the television crews didn't turn up, you'd be dead.
Well,
right?
We're trying to communicate to people, and we know that the electronic media is the way in which information is communicated in the modern world.
It's like sending a television crew down to some, quote, race riot. It creates a riot.
Well, it doesn't work that way with us. We create the events and we create the images which we believe will be susceptible to communication through the electronic media.
Go ahead to Patrick Moore.
Yes, is that me?
That's you.
I think you're being a little blasé and a little tough there, Jack, because I don't think you'd be very happy if you go to Salt Spring Island one day and find the shores of Salt Spring Island covered in oil.
To say the least.
You know, there's irregularities go on right in our own harbor. There's a certain limit on size of tankers coming into Vancouver Harbor that's exceeded. There's bigger boats coming in that are allowed. If you talk to some of the pilots, there's a boat coming in here every 2 or 3 months carrying containers of nerve gas they can't even get rid of.
Yeah, I've
heard of that. A little investigative reporting could turn up a lot of irregularities right here in Vancouver Harbor, not out in the Strait of Juan de Fuca. You can imagine what would happen.
Well, the next time you know of one, will you phone
down in our harbor?
Let us know. I mean...
I'm not in a position to let you know, but investigative reporting could discover it. Go and talk to some pilots.
Good idea. Put it on the list.
Going on.
See, we say there's 2 ways to get people together to stop this thing. Either they get together now and they stop it before the oil spill happens, or they wait till after it happens and they wake up practically sick to their stomach and see it on television what they've done, you know?
Yeah. It's disgusting, and I think Jack's being a little blasé.
No, I may be a little testy this morning.
If Salt Spring Island gets buried in it, he's going to be the one crying then.
Thank you very much, sir. Where are we? Port Angeles, Washington. Go ahead, please, to Patrick Moore of Greenpeace.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, a little while ago on the TV, he said that everyone down in Washington State was all for stopping the super tankers, etc. And I just wanted to let them know that it's not everyone. There are some, myself included, and several other people I know that think what Greenpeace did, that the ones who were arrested should be fined under the maximum penalty of the law, 5 years and $50,000, and that they had no right to endanger lives, which they did do, whether he says it's the Coast Guard or not. I think that saying the Coast Guard endangered lives is a lot like a bank robber saying the police endangered lives when they pursued him in a high-speed chase.
I gather you're against him and in favor of the Coast Guard action.
Sounds like he's in favor of super tankers to me, Jack.
Well, maybe he is. He's from Port Angeles, Washington.
That's right.
And you feel that the Coast Guard were perfectly proper in stepping in, putting the safety zone around it, arresting them and charging them.
Yes, and I'd like to see him get fined the maximum in court.
Nice guy.
Thank you, sir. Much obliged for your call. I've got lots of viewers in Washington State, and he's fully entitled to say it, especially on this program. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. First of all, I think we should remember that Jacques Cousteau has found plenty of oil out in the high seas. And I'm wondering if Patrick Moore would ever consider running for political office to implement his goals.
Oh, I've thought of that a couple of times, but I'm pretty nonpartisan myself, and so is the environmental movement.
Campaign manager.
We support issues, not political parties.
Well, when you go into a political party, you're tied to their philosophy and their attitude all the way through.
Unfortunately, it's true.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack. I'd just like to congratulate Mr. Moore on the work they're doing. They're putting themselves on the line for all of us living down here, and I think a lot of people don't really appreciate just how difficult their job is. There is one thing I would like to disagree with as far as Mr. Moore's concern about the aquarium. I think thousands and thousands of people have become more conscious of the value of whales simply because they can relate to them by seeing them in action.
Oh, I think he'd concede that, wouldn't you?
It's such a controversial issue. We just have our side to hold up because we're in favor of conserving whales and they're killing them, that's all.
But you also require...
You say that some die in transportation.
Many die.
I say you also require a great deal of public support. In a way, these whales that, yes, I agree with you, you have a point, but in a way they are ambassadors, and they have made thousands of people more aware of the value of those whales.
Sir, there's two sides to this issue. There really are in this particular one, and it's kind of a 50-50 issue in some ways for most people, but we believe we have the obligation to point out the fact that whales are being killed during capture and transport, and that from an ecological point of view and from a humanitarian point of view, there are very serious questions involved here.
Yeah, but surely the benefits of the consciousness raising outweigh
my point from a person who...
Not necessarily.
...seen whales from a distance at sea, but never actually seen them up close. On the other thing, though, as far as the supertankers are concerned, congratulations and keep it up.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. We'll finish the program with Patrick Moore this morning, so I won't be using Polish professor Dr. Antoni Munchat today. I'll be using it at the earliest possible opportunity. First, Patrick Moore after the break. If anybody says that I look like a beach whale from the side, I'll sue. Go ahead, please.
Morning, Jack.
Morning.
First of all, I want to say I agree with Greenpeace's position that this bringing the super tankers in is just a thin wedge to bring them in. And as Patrick said, they've got the traffic lanes there. I'm a seaman. They've sailed up there. The last time I was out on the West Coast, ships coming out, there was a ship coming out, and we had to do a 360-degree turn to stay out of his way. And this is all recorded by Defino Traffic, and it's the best. I think it's the best traffic system in the world. But those tankers coming in at 300,000-ton tankers coming in Juan de Fuca Straits, and every seaman in this coast will tell you that they've had near accidents in Juan de Fuca. And I think the Coast Guard is not telling the truth when they're saying there's just tests to prove that they can't come in. They're at this moment now going to Cherry Point. They have to go up there. They have to have 2 tugs going with them from Port Angeles now. And the previous talker was saying you should talk to some of the pilots, or the public should talk to some of the pilots and some of the experiences that happen in the Straits of Juan de Fuca. I agree with him. And
they unfortunately are kind of shy people who don't like to talk in public about near shaves. They're like airline pilots.
Well, like just to say, as Patrick was saying, you need the media for people to find out about these things. And nobody, seamen don't get on air either and tell about their experiences out there.
You've touched on a really important point, because it's not just the super tankers you have to worry about, it's the increased shipments of coal, the increased shipments of lumber and grain and sulfur and all the other things that are going to run into a super tanker in the middle of the night.
You listen to that traffic, and you should do it sometime, Jack, just for an hour, because you've got that channel 11, 12, and 14 on all the time, listening to them.
Now, it reminds me, at one time there was only one tanker in the world with a double bottom, and that was a home oil, a British home oil tanker with a double bottom. That BT San Diego.
Coast Guard laws now have I would say, are more than likely the best in the world, but still, you look at the accidents on the East Coast.
That BT San Diego, do you happen to know if it was single skin or double skin?
I believe it was single, but I'm not really sure, but that doesn't help when a freighter rams you in the middle of the night.
Thanks for your call, sailor. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. I would just like to say that I agree with the previous gentleman, and I think that the protest the other day served to raise the public's consciousness about issues like tankers going up and down our coast.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'd like to say that I agree with a lot of the objectives of Greenpeace, at least originally, but they seem to have climbed on a lot of bandwagons these days. Last year, they ran a protest walk in Stanley Park, and I was running around the park at that time, and I noticed that although about less than 50% of the population these days smoke, with about 8 out of 10 of their supporters were smoking. And I would think that if they are really bothered about pollution, they would be more interested in...
Is it a fact that 8 out of 10 Greenpeace supporters smoke like chimneys?
I rather doubt it. I quit myself about a year and a half ago, and I never felt better. And it wasn't a protest, it was a fundraising walkathon around Stanley Park, and the people who came were there honestly to give their support to Greenpeace. Most of them were students, and anybody who figures that 8 out of 10 of them smoked must have been counting.
And if you're bringing out smokers, you're reaching the lowest possible moral calibers of the public. Is that not correct?
Well, if our downfall is the fact that some of our members smoke, we're in trouble, eh?
Did you parade against the gypsy moth?
Oh, for the gypsy moth, not against it.
That was stupid.
There was no gypsy moth.
They found one.
Yeah, that's about it. And we told them all along they wouldn't survive here. They don't survive in London, where the climate's like it is here. They do survive in France, where it's a bit more like it is in eastern North America. We told them all along it was too wet and too mild out here for them, and they wouldn't believe us.
That was Patrick Moore's cigarette I was smoking.
No way.
That's a lie.
I got 10 witnesses here.
I only lie when I really have to. Thank you, sir. Next one. Go ahead, please. Hello there.
This aspiring non-smoker wishes to commend the Greenpeace people for what they're doing. However, in the process, is it right to break the law to try and achieve your ends?
May I answer that question clearly and concisely? It is right to break the law in order to prevent a greater crime from occurring. It's called the defense of necessity. It's well established in American and English jurisprudence. And what it means is that it's a good thing to trespass on a nuclear reactor if you're going to prevent thousands of people from dying of cancer. It's okay to take a bulldozer and clear all the houses out of an area, destroy all this property if it's to prevent a forest fire from coming in and wrecking a whole city.
And where does anarchy start or stop?
The defense of necessity is a definitive argument. It says you may commit a crime in order to prevent a greater crime from occurring, and it's up to the judge to decide where the line is.
And whose law?
English and American.
Okay, a truly loyal subject of the chief magistrate will neither consent to nor submit to arbitrary measures. There's another one for you.
That's a good
Roman
point.
law.
Right.
Well, I'm inclined, because of my generation and background, I suppose, to agree somewhat with the caller. That in the final analysis, the greater good of the greater number, whether it's oil or no oil.
How do you interpret that?
The greater good of the greater number.
Well,
I'm a
certainly.
pragmatic person.
I disagree with that.
There's more people in Chicago that want oil than there are people here that don't want the water all ruined, though.
Maybe we haven't got the right to deny them it. In the final analysis.
It's for their own good that they pollute the air of Chicago?
But surely, Mr. Moore, your premise that the very fact that they were doing a tanker test is the thin edge of the wedge, is purely a premise on your part. You might just as well have a whole bunch of little small boats scooting under the bows, doing the kamikaze thing like they do in the inland sea in Japan, underneath the bows of vessels coming under the Lionsgate Bridge. and you could isolate some, shall we say, communities.
Well, all we know is that it worked. It brought awareness and concern about supertankers to the people of British Columbia and the United States.
Things that Hitler did worked also.
Yeah, but you're not out of the salt chuck yet, Patrick.
Hitler?
You're not out of the salt chuck yet. It's not fair to ask you questions if you're looking forward to your appearance in court, but I will anyway. You've got lots of money to hire fancy lawyers, of course.
We have an experienced environmental movement legal team in Seattle that is charging us virtually nothing for our defense, because that's their job, is to defend environmental movement people who get in trouble with the law on these necessity civil disobedience types of situations. And it's not going to cost us much, and we think the judge will throw it out, because the charges are, as far as we're concerned, not factually correct, and also we don't think the Coast Guard had the authority to make this regulation. We don't think the United States Congress envisioned the Coast Guard to be using its right to make safety zones to make this kind of political zone around the supertanker. So it's going to get thrown out.
My thanks to Patrick Moore, Greenpeace. See you in court.
Thank you, Jack.
And I shall be back after the break. I am commanded to tell you that at 11 a.m. today on the station, we will see live coverage of the hostages in Washington to meet Reagan. Gladys, tomorrow.
We're having James Chabot talking about lands, parks, and
The law
et cetera.
for